Ethan Carter lived a simple life. He was not rich, but he was happy. Every morning he woke up early, ate a quick breakfast, and headed to his small auto repair shop in the heart of Ohio. The shop was nothing fancy, just a one-room garage with a rusted sign that read, "Carter's Fix It." It wasn't much, but it was his. Ethan had built it from scratch, fixing cars for anyone who needed help. His hands were always dirty, his clothes smelled like oil, and his wallet was usually empty. But none of that mattered to him. What mattered was doing honest work and helping people keep their cars running. Growing up, Ethan had always been fascinated by machines. When he was a boy, he would spend hours in his father's garage, watching how things worked. His dad taught him everything he knew about engines, brakes, and transmissions. Those lessons stuck with Ethan throughout his life. Even after his father passed away, Ethan kept the garage open. It was a way to honor his dad's memory and make a living at the same time. People in town trusted Ethan because he never overcharged or cut corners. If a car could be fixed, Ethan would find a way to do it. And if it couldn't, he'd tell the truth instead of trying to sell someone something they didn't need. Despite his hard work, money was tight. Ethan lived paycheck to paycheck, barely making enough to cover rent and groceries. Some nights, as he sat alone in his tiny apartment, he wondered what it would feel like to have more. Not just more money, but more respect, more freedom, more of a chance to show the world that he wasn't just some grease-stained mechanic. He wanted to prove that he could achieve something big, even if he came from humble beginnings. One quiet afternoon, while waiting for a customer's car to cool down before starting repairs, Ethan decided to scroll through an online classified site on his phone. It was something he did occasionally when business was slow. Most of the listings were for junky old cars or parts he already had lying around the shop. But then, something caught his eye. A sleek black Mercedes-Benz S-Class was listed for sale at an unbelievably low price. The ad said it was lightly used and included several high-quality photos of the car. It looked perfect: shiny paint, spotless rims, leather seats so smooth they practically glowed. Ethan stared at the screen, his heart racing. He had seen cars like this before, but only in magazines or on TV. They belonged to wealthy businessmen or celebrities, not guys like him. Still, the price tag was impossible to ignore. The seller was asking $15,000, a fraction of what such a car would normally cost. At first, Ethan thought it must be a scam. Who would sell a luxury car for so little? But the ad seemed legitimate. The seller claimed they needed cash quickly due to unexpected medical bills and assured potential buyers that all paperwork was in order. For hours, Ethan debated whether to respond. On one hand, it felt too good to be true. On the other hand, what if it wasn't? What if this was his chance to finally step out of the shadows and into the spotlight? He imagined driving the car down Main Street, turning heads as he passed by. People would see him differently, not as the guy who fixed their broken-down sedans, but as someone successful, someone important. Finally, Ethan made up his mind. He couldn't let this opportunity slip away. He called his older brother Jake, who lived a few towns over. Jake was the only family Ethan had left, and though they didn't talk often, they were close. After explaining the situation, Ethan asked if Jake could lend him some money. Jake hesitated at first, warning Ethan to be careful. But deep down, he wanted to believe his little brother deserved a break. Reluctantly, Jake agreed to help. The next day, Ethan withdrew every penny from his savings account and added Jake's loan to the pile. With $15,000 in cash stuffed into an envelope, he set off on the 2-hour drive to meet the seller. The address led him to a quiet suburban neighborhood where the houses were neatly painted and the lawns perfectly trimmed. As he pulled up to the curb, he spotted the Mercedes parked in the driveway. It looked even better in person than in the pictures. A man named Chris greeted Ethan warmly and invited him inside to discuss the details. Chris explained that he really needed to sell the car fast and reiterated that all the paperwork was ready to go. Ethan inspected the vehicle thoroughly, checking under the hood, looking for scratches, and testing the engine. Everything seemed fine. There were no signs of damage or tampering. Satisfied, Ethan handed over the envelope filled with cash. Chris counted the money carefully. nodded and gave Ethan the keys along with a folder containing what appeared to be the title and registration documents. As Ethan slid behind the wheel of the Mercedes for the first time, he felt a rush of excitement, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The leather seat hugged him comfortably and the dashboard glimmered with polished chrome accents. Turning the key in the ignition, he heard the engine purr softly, almost like a cat stretching after a nup. For a moment, he forgot about the years of struggle, the long hours at the shop, and the countless sacrifices he'd made. All that mattered was right here, right now. This was his dream come true. Driving home, Ethan couldn't stop smiling. He rolled down the windows and let the cool evening air wash over him. Cars honked as they passed by, their drivers probably wondering who owned such a luxurious ride. For once, Ethan didn't feel invisible. He felt powerful, important, like he finally belonged somewhere. But as he parked the Mercedes outside his shop later that night, a nagging thought crept into the back of his mind. Was it possible that something was wrong with the car? Had he been too eager, too blinded by the promise of success to notice any warning signs? Shaking off the doubt, Ethan reminded himself that he'd done everything right. He'd inspected the car, paid the full amount, and received what looked like proper documentation. Tomorrow, he told himself, he'd take care of transferring the registration and updating the plates. Until then, he allowed himself to bask in the glow of his newfound achievement. Little did Ethan know, trouble was already brewing just beneath the surface. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. He couldn't wait to show off his new car. After getting dressed, he stepped outside and stood beside the Mercedes for a moment, admiring how it gleamed in the sunlight. It felt surreal to see something so expensive parked right there in front of his humble repair shop. For once, Carter's Fix-It didn't look so plain. The sleek black car added a touch of elegance that made even the rusted sign above the garage door seem less shabby. Ethan decided to leave the car parked out front as a way to draw attention. He figured people would stop by just to take a closer look, or maybe even ask him about it. Sure enough, within an hour, a customer named Linda pulled into the lot. She was a regular who often brought her old sedan in for oil changes and tire rotations. As she stepped out of her car, she glanced at the Mercedes and raised an eyebrow. "Wow, Ethan," she said, her tone half surprised, half teasing. "Did you win the lottery or something?" Ethan chuckled nervously but couldn't hide his pride. "Nope, just saved up for a while," he replied, trying to sound casual. "Thought it was time I treated myself." Linda nodded, walking around the car to get a better look. Then she paused near the rear bumper and frowned. "Hey, isn't that a dealer's tag?" she asked, pointing at the license plate. "Shouldn't you have transferred the registration already?" Her question hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He hadn't thought much about the paperwork when he bought the car. The seller had assured him everything was in order, and Ethan had been too excited to double-check. Now standing there in front of Linda, he felt a wave of unease wash over him. What if something wasn't right? What if the car really did belong to a dealership? "I'm sure it's fine," Ethan said quickly, forcing a smile. "I'll take care of it today." But inside, his mind was racing. He knew he should call the seller immediately and confirm the details. If anything was wrong, he needed to fix it before it became a bigger problem. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat in his office, staring at the phone. He dialed the number listed in the ad again, but this time, no one answered. He left a voicemail, asking for clarification about the registration, and hung up, feeling more anxious than ever. Just as he was about to try calling again, the sound of a large vehicle pulling into the lot caught his attention. Looking out the window, he saw a tow truck approaching, followed closely by a police cruiser with flashing lights. Ethan's stomach dropped. He stepped outside, his heart pounding as two officers climbed out of the cruiser. One of them, a tall man with a stern expression, approached him while the other stayed near the car. "Are you Ethan Carter?" the officer asked, his voice firm but not unkind. "Yes, that's me," Ethan replied, trying to stay calm. "What's going on?" The officer gestured toward the Mercedes. "We received a report that this vehicle may have been stolen. Can you tell us where you got it?" Ethan blinked in disbelief. "Stolen? No, I bought it fair and square. I paid cash for it yesterday. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner before continuing. Sir, we're going to need you to come down to the station to explain this further. In the meantime, we'll have to impound the car until we sort things out. Panic surged through Ethan. Wait, you can't take my car, he protested. I didn't steal it, I swear. I worked hard for this money. But the officers were unmoved. They confiscated the keys and told Ethan he'd need to provide proof of purchase if he wanted to clear his name. As the tow truck hauled the Mercedes away, Ethan stood frozen, watching his dream disappear down the road. His hands trembled as he climbed into his old pickup truck and drove to the police station. At the station, Ethan met Detective Sarah Monroe, a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She listened carefully as Ethan recounted the story of how he'd found the car online, met the seller, and handed over $15,000 in cash. He showed her the folder containing the supposed title and registration documents, hoping they would prove his innocence. Detective Monroe studied the papers closely. Something about them seemed off, though she didn't say so outright. Instead, she promised to investigate further and advised Ethan to stay patient. If you're telling the truth, she said, we'll figure this out. But until then, I need you to cooperate fully. Feeling defeated, Ethan left the station and returned to his shop. Word spread quickly around town about what had happened. Some people believed Ethan's story, while others whispered behind his back, speculating that he must have done something shady to afford such an expensive car. Even Linda, who had always been friendly, gave him a sympathetic but skeptical look when she stopped by later that day. Meanwhile, at the dealership where the Mercedes had originally come from, manager Greg Peterson was fuming. When he heard that the stolen car had been recovered, he immediately called the police to demand answers. How could someone just walk off with one of his most valuable vehicles without anyone noticing? And why had it taken so long to track it down? Greg arrived at the police station the next morning, determined to confront whoever had taken his property. To his surprise, he found himself face to face with Ethan, a scruffy mechanic who looked completely out of place sitting in the sterile interview room. At first glance, Greg assumed Ethan was guilty. Why else would a guy like him be driving a luxury car unless he'd stolen it? You've got some nerve, Greg snapped as soon as the officers allowed him to speak with Ethan. Do you know how much trouble you've caused? Ethan clenched his fists under the table but kept his voice steady. I didn't steal your car, he said firmly. I paid for it. I didn't know it was stolen. Greg scoffed. Oh, come on. You expect me to believe that? A guy like you, buying a Mercedes, that's ridiculous. Detective Monroe stepped in before the argument escalated. Mr. Peterson, let's focus on the facts here, she said calmly. Right now we're trying to determine exactly what happened. Accusing Mr. Carter won't help us get closer to the truth. Greg reluctantly backed off, but his anger simmered beneath the surface. He couldn't understand how this mess had happened in the first place. Had someone on his staff messed up, or worse, had one of his employees betrayed him? Either way, he was determined to hold someone accountable. As the investigation continued, Detective Monroe began digging deeper into the dealership's records. She discovered inconsistencies in the paperwork related to the Mercedes. The car had been listed as sold months earlier, but the transaction had never been finalized. Stranger still, the employee responsible for handling the sale had quit shortly afterward and hadn't been seen since. Monroe's suspicions grew. Something wasn't adding up, and she was starting to think that Ethan might be telling the truth after all. But proving it wouldn't be easy. She needed concrete evidence, and fast. Back at his shop, Ethan struggled to focus on work. Customers trickled in throughout the day, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept replaying the events in his head, wondering if he should have done something differently. Should he have inspected the paperwork more thoroughly? Should he have trusted his instincts when the deal seemed too good to be true? The questions haunted him, making it hard to sleep at night. Despite the chaos, Ethan refused to give up hope. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, and he was determined to fight for justice. Little did he know the truth was about to come to light, and it would change everything. Detective Sarah Monroe was not a woman who rushed to conclusions. She had spent years honing her skills as an investigator, learning to separate fact from fiction and to trust her instincts when something didn't feel right. In Ethan's case, there were too many unanswered questions for her to simply write him off as guilty. His story might have sounded far-fetched, a poor mechanic buying a luxury car with cash, but his demeanor suggested honesty. He wasn't defensive or evasive. Instead, he seemed genuinely confused and scared. Monroe decided to dig deeper into the dealership's records. She started by reviewing the paperwork related to the Mercedes-Benz S-Class. What she found was troubling. The car had been listed as sold months earlier, but the transaction had never been completed. There was no record of payment, no updated title, and no explanation for why the vehicle remained on the dealership's lot. Stranger still, the employee, responsible for handling the sale, Ryan Mitchell, had abruptly quit his job shortly after the supposed transaction. His sudden departure raised red flags. Monroe requested security footage from the dealership covering the weeks leading up to the car's disappearance. Greg Peterson, the manager, reluctantly handed over the tapes. As Monroe reviewed them, she noticed something odd. On the night the car vanished, there was a gap in the footage, a full 20 minutes where the cameras appeared to be offline. It wasn't a technical malfunction. Someone had deliberately disabled them. This discovery shifted the focus of the investigation. If the car had been stolen, it likely involved someone on the inside. Ryan Mitchell became the prime suspect. Monroe tracked down his address and paid him a visit later that evening. Ryan lived in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. When Monroe knocked on the door, he answered cautiously, clearly surprised to see a detective standing on his doorstep. "Ryan Mitchell?" Monroe asked, showing her badge. "I need to talk to you about a car that went missing from the dealership." Ryan's face went pale. He stammered for a moment before inviting her inside. Once seated, Monroe laid out the evidence she had gathered so far. She mentioned the incomplete paperwork, the suspicious timing of his resignation, and the gap in the security footage. Ryan fidgeted nervously, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't steal anything," Ryan finally said, his voice shaky. "But I know what happened." Monroe leaned forward, her expression sharp. "Then tell me." Ryan sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, here's the truth. A few months ago, this guy came into the dealership. He said he wanted to buy the Mercedes but needed time to get the money together. He offered me a cut if I let him take the car early and fake the paperwork. At first, I thought it was just a harmless deal. I'd make some extra cash and no one would notice. But then the guy disappeared and I panicked. I quit my job because I didn't want to get caught." Monroe listened carefully, jotting down notes. "Do you know who this guy was?" Ryan nodded. "His name is Chris, that's all I know. He never gave me a last name, but he drove a blue pickup truck and I remember seeing him around town sometimes." With this new information, Monroe thanked Ryan and left the apartment. She knew she had enough to reopen the case against Ethan. The pieces were starting to fit together. Chris, the seller, had orchestrated the theft, using Ryan to cover his tracks. Ethan, unaware of any wrongdoing, had unknowingly purchased a stolen car. The next day, Monroe called Ethan and Greg to the police station for a meeting. Tensions were high as they sat across from each other in a small conference room. Greg still looked angry while Ethan appeared anxious, unsure of what would happen next. Monroe began by summarizing her findings. "Based on our investigation," she said, addressing both men, "it appears that neither of you is directly responsible for the theft of the Mercedes. However, there are significant issues at play here." She turned to Greg first. "Mr. Peterson, your dealership failed to properly secure the vehicle or update its registration status. This created an opportunity for someone to exploit the system. Additionally, your former employee, Ryan Mitchell, admitted to falsifying documents to facilitate the illegal removal of the car." Greg's face flushed with embarrassment. He opened his mouth to protest but stopped himself, realizing the truth, in her words. Monroe then turned to Ethan. "As for you, Mr. Carter, while you did purchase the car in good faith, you neglected to verify the legitimacy of the transaction. Buying a vehicle without ensuring proper documentation is risky and leaves room for fraud." Ethan nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. "I understand. he said quietly. I should have been more careful. Monroe softened her tone slightly. That said, we believe you acted in good faith. You're not being charged with any crime. However, we will need to return the car to its rightful owner once we locate him. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment. He had hoped to keep the Mercedes, but he understood the situation. Still, part of him couldn't help wondering if justice would truly be served. Would Chris ever be caught, or would the real culprit walk away scot-free? In the days that followed, Monroe worked tirelessly to track down Chris. Using the description provided by Ryan, she identified several possible leads. One of them led her to a mechanic's shop 2 towns over. When she arrived, she spotted a familiar blue pickup truck parked outside. Inside, she found Chris working on a car. He froze when he saw her badge. Chris? Monroe asked. We need to talk about a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Chris tried to deny involvement at first, claiming he had no idea what she was talking about. But when Monroe presented the evidence, including Ryan's confession and surveillance photos linking him to the dealership, he broke down. He admitted to stealing the car and selling it to Ethan, thinking he'd gotten away with it. With Chris in custody, the case finally began to close. The Mercedes was returned to its original owner, a wealthy businessman who had unknowingly purchased it months earlier. He agreed to sell it back to Ethan at a fair price, allowing him to finance it rather than pay up front again. Though the ordeal had been stressful, Ethan felt grateful for the second chance. As for Greg, he apologized to Ethan personally, acknowledging his role in the mess. You deserved better than what happened, he said sincerely. Let me make it right? Ethan accepted the apology, though he remained cautious. The experience had taught him valuable lessons about trust, responsibility, and the importance of doing things the right way, even if it meant waiting longer for his dreams to come true. Despite everything, Ethan refused to let bitterness take hold. Instead, he focused on moving forward, determined to rebuild his reputation and prove that he was more than just a mechanic with big dreams. And as he stood outside his shop one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, he allowed himself to hope again for brighter days ahead. Ethan Carter had always been a man of resilience. Even as the weight of recent events pressed down on him, he found ways to keep moving forward. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions: excitement, fear, anger, and finally, a sense of cautious relief. Now that the truth about the stolen Mercedes had come to light, Ethan felt like he could breathe again. Chris, the real culprit, was behind bars, and the car's rightful owner had agreed to sell it back to Ethan under fair terms. But even with the chaos settling, Ethan knew his journey wasn't over yet. Word of the ordeal spread quickly through town. People who once doubted Ethan's story now saw him in a different light. His honesty and determination during the investigation earned him respect from many, including some of his regular customers. One afternoon, as Ethan worked on replacing a timing belt for Linda's sedan, she leaned against the hood of her car and smiled at him. You know, Ethan, she said, I think you handled all of this pretty well. Most people would have fallen apart. Ethan wiped his greasy hands on a rag and chuckled softly. Well, I didn't have much of a choice, did I? Either sink or swim? Linda nodded thoughtfully. Still, not everyone would have kept their cool. You proved a lot of people wrong, including me. Her words caught Ethan off guard. He hadn't expected anyone to admit they'd misjudged him, especially someone like Linda, who had always seemed skeptical. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of pride. Maybe this whole mess wasn't just a disaster. It was also an opportunity to show the world what kind of person he truly was. As the days passed, business at Carter's Fix-It began to pick up. More customers came in than usual, and some even brought baked goods or small gifts as tokens of support. One elderly woman named Mrs. Harper dropped off a plate of homemade cookies, telling Ethan how proud she was of how he'd handled himself. A local radio station even called to interview him, asking if he'd be willing to share his story. At first, Ethan hesitated, unsure if he wanted the attention, but after talking it over with Jake, His brother encouraged him to go for it. "People need to hear your side of things," Jake said when they spoke on the phone. "You've got nothing to hide. Let them see the real you." So Ethan agreed to the interview. Sitting in front of the microphone, he recounted everything, from finding the ad online to the moment the police took away the car. He spoke honestly about his mistakes, acknowledging that he should have been more careful with the paperwork. But he also emphasized that he'd acted in good faith and never intended to break the law. By the end of the conversation, the host thanked Ethan for sharing his experience and praised his integrity. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, the interview aired on the radio, and Ethan's story reached far beyond the borders of his small town. Calls poured into the shop, from reporters, curious listeners, and even strangers offering words of encouragement. Some local businesses offered free advertising to help promote Carter's Fix-It, while others sent donations to cover the costs Ethan had incurred during the legal process. It was as if the entire community had rallied around him, determined to make things right. Amidst the outpouring of support, Greg Peterson made another attempt to mend fences. After their initial meeting at the police station, Greg had gone back to the dealership feeling ashamed of how he'd treated Ethan. He realized he'd let his frustration cloud his judgment, jumping to conclusions without considering the facts. Wanting to make amends, Greg visited Carter's Fix-It one afternoon, carrying a box filled with tools and supplies. "I brought these for you," Greg said awkwardly, setting the box on the counter. "Figured you might need them." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by the gesture. "Thanks, but why?" Greg sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I owe you an apology. I judged you unfairly, and I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of what happened. If anything, I should have trusted Detective Monroe's instincts sooner, instead of pointing fingers." Ethan studied Greg for a moment before nodding slowly. "Apology accepted, but don't think this means I'm letting you off easy," he added with a faint smile. "Next time you accuse someone of stealing, maybe check your own backyard first." Greg laughed nervously, grateful for the lighthearted remark. "Fair enough. And hey, if you ever need anything, parts, advice, whatever, just let me know. Consider it my way of making things right." Though Ethan still harbored some lingering resentment, he appreciated Greg's effort. Over time, their relationship improved, evolving into something resembling mutual respect. Greg even referred a few customers to Carter's Fix-It, helping boost Ethan's business further. With the increased attention came new opportunities. A local entrepreneur approached Ethan about expanding his shop, offering to invest in renovations and equipment upgrades. At first, Ethan was hesitant. He liked his little garage the way it was. It reminded him of his dad's old workshop. But after discussing it with Jake, who reminded him that growth didn't mean losing sight of his roots, Ethan decided to take the leap. The investment allowed him to hire 2 additional mechanics, update the interior, and even install a waiting area for customers. For the first time in years, Carter's Fix-It looked modern and professional. Despite the changes, Ethan remained grounded. He continued to prioritize quality work and honest service, ensuring that every customer left satisfied. His reputation grew, not just locally but across neighboring towns as well. People traveled miles to bring their cars to him, knowing they could trust him to do the job right. One evening, as Ethan locked up the shop and prepared to head home, he paused to look at the newly renovated building. The rusted sign above the door had been replaced with a sleek metal plaque bearing the name Carter's Fix-It. Inside, the walls gleamed with fresh paint, and the floors sparkled thanks to diligent cleaning. It was a far cry from the humble garage he'd started with, yet it still felt familiar. Ethan climbed into his pickup truck and drove toward the outskirts of town, where the Mercedes now sat parked in his driveway. Financing the car had been a smart decision. It allowed him to keep his savings intact while still achieving his dream. As he stepped out of the truck and approached the sleek black vehicle, he ran a hand along its smooth surface. The leather seats smelled rich and inviting, and the dashboard glimmered under the porch light. For a moment, Ethan simply stood there, taking it all in. This car represented more than just luxury. It symbolized perseverance, redemption, and the power of staying true to oneself. He slid behind the wheel, turned the key in the ignition, and listened to the engine purr softly. Driving down the quiet country roads, he reflected on how far he'd come since those early mornings tinkering in his father's garage. Life hadn't been easy, but every challenge had shaped him into the man he was today. As he pulled back into the driveway and turned off the engine, Ethan smiled to himself. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but he was ready to face whatever came next. After all, he'd already proven that no matter how tough things got, he could rise above. And that gave him hope, not just for himself but for anyone else brave enough to chase their dreams no matter the odds. Ethan Carter's life had changed in ways he never imagined. The ordeal with the Mercedes had tested him, but it also opened doors he thought were forever closed. His small repair shop, once a modest operation tucked away on the edge of town, was now thriving. New customers came from miles around, drawn not only by Ethan's skill as a mechanic but also by his story of resilience and integrity. People admired how he had faced adversity head-on and emerged stronger on the other side. With the added income from the growing business, Ethan was able to pay off the loan for the Mercedes faster than expected. Each monthly payment felt like a step toward reclaiming what had been taken from him, not just the car, but his dignity. He still remembered the sting of being accused of theft, the humiliation of having the police confiscate the keys, and the sleepless nights wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. But those memories no longer weighed him down. Instead, they fueled his determination to keep pushing forward. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan arrived at the shop earlier than usual. The air smelled of fallen leaves and fresh coffee from the diner across the street. As he unlocked the garage door, he noticed a man standing near the entrance holding a clipboard. The man introduced himself as Daniel, a representative from a regional auto parts supplier. "We've been hearing great things about your work," Daniel said with a friendly smile. "We'd love to partner with you. You'd get discounted rates on parts, plus access to exclusive training programs for your team." Ethan listened carefully, weighing the offer. It sounded promising, but he didn't want to rush into anything without thinking it through. After all, he'd learned the hard way that shortcuts often led to trouble. Still, the idea of expanding his knowledge and improving his services appealed to him. By the end of their conversation, Ethan agreed to give the partnership a try. He figured it couldn't hurt to explore new opportunities, especially ones that could benefit both his business and his customers. The weeks that followed were busy. Between managing the shop, overseeing his new employees, and attending training sessions, Ethan barely had time to breathe. But he didn't mind. Hard work was something he understood, and seeing the results of his efforts made it all worthwhile. His mechanics grew more skilled, completing jobs faster and with higher quality. Customers noticed the difference and left, glowing reviews online, which brought even more business to the shop. As Carter's Fix-It continued to grow, so did Ethan's confidence. For years, he'd doubted whether he was capable of achieving anything beyond fixing cars for a living. Now he realized he was capable of much more. He started dreaming bigger, thinking about opening another location or maybe even franchising his business someday. Those dreams felt less like fantasies and more like possibilities within reach. But Ethan didn't forget where he came from. Every Friday evening, after closing the shop, he drove out to the cemetery where his father was buried. Sitting beside the weathered gravestone, he talked quietly, sharing updates about the shop and the challenges he'd overcome. Sometimes he laughed at the absurdity of it all, the stolen car, the accusations, the media attention. Other times he cried, letting out the emotions he kept bottled up during the week. Talking to his dad helped ground him, reminding him of the values he'd been raised with: honesty, hard work, and kindness. Greg Peterson, the dealership manager, who had once accused Ethan of theft, became an unlikely ally. Though their relationship had started on rocky ground, Greg genuinely wanted to make amends. He invited Ethan to join a local business owners group where entrepreneurs shared advice and supported each other's ventures. At first, Ethan hesitated, unsure if he belonged among such accomplished individuals. But Greg insisted, telling him, "You earned your spot here, Ethan. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." Over time, Ethan found value in the group. He learned tips on marketing, finance, and leadership that helped him run his shop more efficiently. More importantly, he formed friendships with people who respected him for who he was, not for what he owned or how much money he made. These connections reminded him that success wasn't just about wealth. It was about building meaningful relationships and contributing to the community. Despite his newfound prosperity, Ethan remained humble. He donated a portion of his profits to charity, focusing on causes close to his heart, like funding scholarships for kids interested in automotive trades. He also volunteered at a nearby youth center, teaching teenagers basic car maintenance skills. Watching them light up when they successfully changed a tire or fixed a flat reminded him of his own childhood, tinkering in his dad's garage. It gave him a sense of purpose beyond running a business. One day, while working on a customer's car, Ethan overheard two young boys outside the shop talking excitedly about the shiny black Mercedes parked in his driveway. One of them pointed at it and said, "That's Mr. Carter's car. He worked really hard for it." The other boy nodded. "Yeah, my mom says he's proof that if you're honest and don't give up, good things will happen." Ethan smiled to himself, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. Those words meant more to him than any amount of money or fame ever could. They reminded him why he'd fought so hard to clear his name, not just for himself, but to show others that integrity mattered. Winter arrived, blanketing the town in snow. Business slowed slightly, giving Ethan time to reflect on the past year. He sat in his office one evening, flipping through old photos of the shop before the renovations. The images showed a cluttered, outdated space, a far cry from the polished facility it had become. Yet despite the changes, the essence of Carter's Fix-It remained the same. It was still a place where people trusted him to fix their problems, both mechanical and personal. Just as Ethan was about to close the photo album, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Detective Sarah Monroe, checking in to see how he was doing. Over the months, they had stayed in touch, occasionally meeting for coffee to catch up. She had played a crucial role in clearing his name, and Ethan would always be grateful for her dedication to uncovering the truth. "Doing well, thanks to you," Ethan replied. "How's the detective life treating you?" Monroe responded quickly. Same old, just chasing bad guys and solving mysteries. Speaking of which, I heard about your expansion plans. Good luck with that." Ethan chuckled, typing back, "Thanks. Maybe one day I'll owe you a ride in the Mercedes." Her reply came instantly. "Deal." As Ethan put his phone down, he glanced out the window at the snow-covered streets. Life had thrown him curveballs, but he'd learned to hit them out of the park. He thought about the future, not just for himself, but for the people who depended on him. His employees, his customers, and the kids he mentored at the youth center. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he was ready to face it. Later that night, as Ethan drove home in the Mercedes, he rolled down the window and let the cold air wash over him. The roads were quiet, the world wrapped in a serene blanket of white. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the struggles, the victories, and the lessons learned along the way. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly content. Pulling into his driveway, Ethan turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. Then, stepping out of the car, he looked up at the starry sky and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Whether it was fate, hard work, or a little bit of both, he knew one thing for certain. He had earned every inch of this life. And he wasn't done yet. Spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal. The snow melted away, revealing green grass and budding trees. Ethan Carter stood outside his shop early one morning, sipping coffee as he watched the sun rise over the horizon. It was a peaceful moment, one that allowed him to reflect on how far he'd come in such a short time. His life had transformed in ways he never imagined possible, but the journey wasn't just about material success. It was about growth, resilience, and finding meaning in every challenge. Carter's Fix-It had become more than just a repair shop. It was a cornerstone of the community. People trusted Ethan not only to fix their cars, but also to listen when they needed someone to talk to. He often found himself offering advice or lending an ear to customers who stopped by during tough times. Some came for oil changes, others for brake repairs, but many stayed longer than necessary, sharing stories about their lives. Ethan realized that his shop wasn't just a place to mend vehicles, it was a place to connect, to remind people they weren't alone. One afternoon, a young woman named Amy walked into the shop, her hands trembling as she clutched the keys to her beat-up sedan. She explained that her car had broken down on the way to an important job interview. Without it, she feared losing the opportunity. Ethan could see the desperation in her eyes, so he reassured her. "Don't worry," he said gently. "We'll get you back on the road." While his team worked on the car, Ethan sat with Amy in the waiting area, chatting casually to help ease her nerves. They talked about her aspirations, to start a career in graphic design, and her struggles raising 2 kids as a single mother. By the time the repairs were done, Amy left not only with a working car, but also with a renewed sense of hope. A few weeks later, she returned to thank Ethan, proudly showing him the acceptance letter from the company where she'd interviewed. "That day changed everything for me," she told him, tears glistening in her eyes. "If you hadn't helped me, I don't know what I would have done." Moments like these reminded Ethan why he loved what he did. Sure, fixing cars paid the bills, but helping people, that was the real reward. He began hosting free workshops at the shop on weekends, teaching basic car maintenance skills to anyone interested. Kids learned how to check tire pressure and change oil filters, while adults picked up tips on diagnosing common issues. These events brought the community together, turning strangers into friends. As the months passed, Ethan continued expanding his business. With Greg Peterson's guidance, he opened a second location in a nearby town. This new shop mirrored the original in both quality and values, ensuring that every customer received the same level of care. Ethan hired local mechanics, providing jobs and training opportunities to those eager to learn. Watching his employees grow gave him immense satisfaction, knowing he was making a difference in their lives too. Despite his success, Ethan remained grounded. He still drove the Mercedes occasionally, but most days he preferred his old pickup truck. It reminded him of simpler times before fame and fortune entered the picture. When people asked why he didn't use the luxury car more often, he simply shrugged and said, "It's nice, sure, but it doesn't define me. My work does." His humility earned him even more admiration. Local newspapers wrote articles about him, calling him a role model for small-town entrepreneurs. One reporter described him as a mechanic with a heart of gold, highlighting not only his professional achievements, but also his commitment to giving back. Ethan laughed when he read the headline, shaking his head at the exaggeration. To him, he was just doing what felt right. The partnership with the auto parts supplier proved invaluable. Thanks to Daniel's connections, Ethan gained access to cutting-edge tools and technologies, allowing him to offer services previously unavailable in the area. Customers marveled at how quickly and efficiently problems were resolved, spreading the word to friends and family. Business boomed, but Ethan made sure to prioritize quality over quantity. He refused to cut corners, knowing that trust took years to build but seconds to destroy. Summer rolled around, bringing warmer weather and busier days at the shop. One evening after closing up, Ethan decided to take the Mercedes out for a drive. He rarely used it anymore, but tonight felt special. As he cruised along the quiet country roads, he thought about the twists and turns his life had taken. From struggling to make ends meet to becoming a respected figure in the community, the journey had been unpredictable yet rewarding. He parked near a hill overlooking the town and stepped out of the car. The view was breathtaking. The lights, twinkling below, the stars scattered across the sky above. For a moment, Ethan let himself bask in the beauty of it all. Then, leaning against the hood of the Mercedes, he pulled out his phone and dialed Jake's number. "Hey, big brother," Jake answered, his voice warm and familiar. "What's up?" "Not much," Ethan replied, smiling. "Just wanted to say thanks for believing in me even when things looked bad." Jake chuckled softly. "You didn't need my belief, Ethan. You had enough grit and determination to carry you through. But hey, I'm glad I could help." They talked for a while, reminiscing about their childhood and discussing future plans. Jake mentioned he might visit soon, bringing his wife and kids along. Ethan grinned at the thought of seeing his nieces and nephews again. Family meant everything to him, and he cherished every moment spent together. Hanging up, Ethan gazed at the horizon once more. He thought about his father, whose lessons had guided him throughout his life. He thought about Detective Monroe, whose persistence had uncovered the truth. And he thought about everyone who had supported him along the way, his customers, his employees, his friends, and even Greg Peterson. Each person had played a part in shaping the man he'd become. Driving home, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life hadn't always been kind, but it had taught him valuable lessons. He had learned to trust his instincts, to stand firm in the face of adversity, and to believe in himself even when others doubted him. Most importantly, he had discovered that true success wasn't measured by wealth or possessions. It was measured by the impact you had on others. When he arrived home, Ethan parked the Mercedes in the driveway and went inside. Sitting at the kitchen table, he opened a notebook and began jotting down ideas for the future. Expanding the youth center programs, launching a scholarship fund for aspiring mechanics, partnering with schools to promote vocational training. These were goals worth pursuing. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he welcomed them. After all, overcoming obstacles was what made life meaningful. As he closed the notebook and turned off the light, Ethan smiled to himself. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and new chances to make a difference. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready. He had proven to himself, and to the world, that dreams could come true if you were willing to fight for them. And so, as the night settled in, and the house grew quiet, Ethan drifted off to sleep, dreaming not of cars or money, but of the countless lives he hoped to touch in the years to come.